Hey YouTube fans, Eric Hayden here in the garden. Still seeing quite a bit of rain across our part of the state. We've actually measured 7 inches of rain in the past 3 days. So getting out in the garden has been difficult. And if you saw our video yesterday, the combination of the rain, the amount of blooms, I have some of my bushes, and the fact that I haven't staked everything has caused some of the roses to actually fall over. I mentioned in the video yesterday that we've been through Hurricane Florence, so we've had winds of 80 to 90 miles per hour. So I do have a lot of roses staked, and I've done other things like cut them down prior to a big hurricane like that. But I've kind of gotten lazy with the staking. And what I mean by that is I should probably be staking more of my roses because they're on Fortuniana, and that's a very shallow root system. In addition, the graft is planted above the ground here. We want the rootstock to be resistant to nematodes. That's why we plant on Fortuniana. If you were to plant the graft below ground, it could go back to its own roots and lose those qualities of being, again, resistant to nematodes. Up north, I know you folks plant your grass below the ground, and that adds a lot of stability to the rose. You don't get that rocking action because a lot of your canes, they're emanating from the bud union itself. It's below the ground and it's more secure. So today's video, we're going to talk about staking your roses. What can you use? Where should you stake them, and why should you do it? I mentioned one reason why. Depending on your rootstock, especially if you're using Fortuniana, you're going to be more prone to having issues. In addition, where you live is going to be a big issue. I'm 3 miles from the ocean. We're breezy today. It's very common for us to have a 15 to 20 mile per hour wind every day outside of big stuff like hurricanes and tropical storms. So again, I'm going to show you what you can use, and we're kind of going to go over some of those supplies. Some of my original roses, I used what James Mills suggested. This is rebar. I don't know. I assume you can get that at the local stores. My dad had a fair amount of that extra. You should probably wrap it in some type of rubber as he suggests, and you can see the damage to this cane here from rubbing on it. So I probably should be covering that up. But originally I used rebar, and this green tape, it's flexible. I'll show you a big roll of it. I have the bud union area tied off to the rebar, and James suggests 4 pieces of rebar. Since I have, was it 42, 43 roses? That's a lot of rebar times 4, so I haven't done that yet, but rebar works pretty well. Something that works even better for me is conduit pipe. This section right here is only about 4 feet. I'll show you how you can use that, but I'll put 1 or 2 of those up and tie off that green. Again, I'm calling it tape, but it's very flexible, and I try to get some of the lower canes down by the bud union. So this is Hot Princess. It's in there pretty good, and I tie that off to the conduit pipe. The reason why I like the conduit pipe, it's a little smoother, it's not quite as rough, and you can have taller sections. I'll talk about that in a second. So that's some of what I use to tie these roses off. While we go over and show you the material, this just caught my eye. Beautiful, beautiful rose. This is Veterans Honor. I mentioned that some roses get damaged in the rain. Folks, we've had 7 inches of rain, and it's been windy. And look at that rose. No, not a speck of damage on it. And nothing about, nothing against lighter colored petal roses, if I could say that. This is Crescendo. It's looking good. Again, it's not looking bad. But notice all the water spots on it. If you have roses that have a lighter coloring, they're going to have a lot more damage during rain. So just kind of a heads up on that. That Veterans Honor, very, very nice regardless of the weather. So before I show you some more of the materials I use, again, the reasoning for it, I need to re-tie some of these. Here's the conduit pipe, and it was tied off to my graft on Mr. Lincoln, but that's come down. So I need to do a little maintenance in the garden. If you watched yesterday, this is the Alina that had fallen over. I have not retied it yet, so no magic tricks or anything, but you'll notice that it's not fallen down as much. All I did was remove every bloom from Alina. And there's a tremendous amount of weight. When you get these higher petaled roses with a lot of petals with them, when they get rain on them, they become very, very heavy. So all I did is remove the blooms themselves, and that really loosened the rose up in terms of being weighted down. I don't know if you can tell from the video yesterday, but it looks like it's not fallen down as much. And again, all I did was remove the roses themselves and then that meant the weight wasn't as much on the rows. I will eventually stake that up here later today, but the tip yesterday was to at least deadhead, and that will certainly help you out in terms of staking these roses up. So I mentioned the conduit pipe, use that, the rebar, and the last thing I use, probably more sparingly, is this, I don't know what it is, but it comes in 6 or 7 foot sections, these green poles. I use those a lot with the Fortuniana. This is Ring of Fire. I potted it up, and you want to stake them in the beginning because they're, again, this graft is very delicate. So I use those with Fortuniana in pots, and then maybe some individual canes that become especially heavy. This is probably what I'm going to use for Alina. So the conduit pipe, the rebar, that's more for lots of canes and near the bud union itself. If you got just a couple canes that are kind of laying down because they're heavy, that's where this green pole can come in. And I say that because it's the thinnest of them all. You can see the circumference on this compared to the conduit. Conduit's much more sturdy. So keep the conduit for more the center part of the bush where it's the heaviest. Again, we're talking the graft and multiple big canes. If you have a couple scragglers on the edges, that's where you can use this green pole. And again, it's nice, it'll work, but that's not going to certainly hold up much more than a cane or two, and kind of more of your thinner ones, certainly not the real thick stuff. So as I wrap things up, I was impressed with that Alina. I'm glad it's not looking as bad as yesterday. All I did was cut off the blooms in the pouring rain itself. So here's some of the materials I'll be using today. I mentioned I'm not sure where you can get rebar, but I'm sure any building supply store. It's rusty and it's smaller, so I'm not a huge fan of that. These are the green poles you can get, again, at the hardware store. And these are 4 to 5 foot sections of conduit pipe. And you might say, well, Eric, where do you get that? Any hardware store, it comes in a 10-foot section. I think I get the 1/2 inch. You don't need anything super sturdy. So I'll put the whole section down so you can see the comparison. So it's a 10-foot section. I think it's by a 1/2 inch. So it's one of the thinner ones they have. You don't need 3/4 inch or something crazy. And then at the store, depending where you go, especially some of the Ace Hardwares or some of your mom and pop hardware stores, they will cut this in half for free. They usually run about $2 a piece for a 10-foot section. So you're talking $1 per 5-foot section, and I think that's not too bad. Yes, it can add up, but that's going to last a long time. And so what I've done is when I purchase them, I ask that they be cut. I think in the past I've used a hacksaw, and that takes forever. At the store, they can do it much quicker. So again, what I prefer is that 10-foot section of conduit pipe. I think it's a 1/2 inch in diameter, whatever the thinnest one is, and then try to get them to cut it at the store. I will say, as a meteorologist, this is a lot of metal. So when you're out in your garden, don't be out in your garden when there's a thunderstorm. Our rule with meteorology is when thunder roars, go indoors. If you can hear the thunder, you're at risk of being struck. So again, if you've got a lot of these conduit pipes in your garden, you have a lot of lightning rods in your garden. So no laughing matter, but don't push it if you've got any storms headed your way, because you can see some of these in my garden now. I'll end with some good news for the future. These are what we call basal breaks. Notice these new huge canes. I've got 2 new ones. This is on Louise Estes. This was a maiden planted from Steve Singer. This was last, I guess, spring of 2019, potted up, became root bound by midsummer, and then this was planted midsummer 2019. And it's now getting to be almost a full year since it's been planted in the ground, and it's performing quite well. So if you've got those basal breaks, that's a sign of the future. I've got another one over here to show you. I don't have a million of them. This is one on Fortuniana. It's a little harder to get that from the basal. On Fortuniana, usually you get it from a lower break on the cane. But again, if you got these huge purple canes, that's good news for the future, and you can see a bunch on the other maiden Louise Estes from last year. Speaking of maidens, those are the 2 Maverick and Cajun Moon that are growing for this year. So I did have a question from some fans. Do I grow anything else? Not a lot, but we're gonna have to harvest this. This is some cabbage on the left, squash, that's gonna go on the ground shortly. And our broccoli, I think, is ready. What do you think? Hopefully it's not past past its peak. I know you don't want it to get to the flowering part for sure, but that looks pretty good for broccoli. We'll have to harvest that up today. Hope everybody's staying safe and dry. We're expecting another couple inches this week. So with the 7 we've already had, we may have 10 inches of rain here in the better half of less than a week. So plenty of rain. Wish we could spread it out, but we'll take what we can get. Hope everyone's doing well, and look for our next video. I think I'm going to do something on taking advantage of the rain, putting down some slow release fertilizers in the garden. That is something you can certainly do despite the abundance of rain. Certainly want to stay away from anything synthetic, anything that's going to wash in the soil pretty quickly, but you can get away with alfalfa, meal and pellets and stuff like that. Have a great day, everybody.